Namaskar. A warm welcome to World News and India Perspective on All India Radio. This is Avneet Shukla and with me is Manoj Singh Rana, bringing glimpses of the major developments of the day from across the globe. Over the next half an hour, we shall bring you the latest from the world of politics, economy, sports, entertainment and more. The headlines. Prime Minister Narendra Modi participates in a meeting of European Council as special invitee. Discusses COVID-19 pandemic healthcare cooperation and strengthening of Indo-EU partnership. DCGI gives emergency approval of anti-COVID oral drug developed by DRDO. India's Health Ministry devises national policy for admission of COVID patients to various categories. Supreme Court of India sets up 12-member national task force to streamline oxygen allocation across the country. Sri Lanka approves Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine for emergency use in the country. And in the Madrid Open tennis, Germany's Alexander Zverev and Tim Piotr beat India's Rohan Bopanna and Denis Shapovalov to enter doubles semi-finals. As the number of COVID cases is on the rise again, we appeal to our listeners not to lower the guard, follow all the precautions and all those above 18 years of age to get vaccinated without any hesitation. Stay safe and protected by following these 3 simple steps. Wear a face mask, maintain 2 gaz ki doori for social distancing, and focus on hand and face hygiene. And now the news in detail. India and the leaders of the European Union (EU) and its member states on Saturday highlighted their shared interests, principles and values of democracy, freedom, rule of law and respect for human rights in a joint statement released after the meeting of Prime Minister Narendra Modi and the EU leaders. The leaders met in hybrid format in Porto, Portugal, where Mr. Modi participated through virtual medium. The statement said, today's leaders' meeting reflected a pivotal moment since the first India-EU summit in 2000 and further strengthened the India-EU partnership relationship towards a better future for everyone. The leaders agreed to advance the implementation of the actions set out in the India-EU Roadmap 2025 as well as of the new decisions taken on Saturday. Both India and EU agreed that as the world's 2 largest democracies, they have a common interest in ensuring security, prosperity and sustainable development in a multipolar world. The leaders emphasized the importance of effective and inclusive rules-based multilateralism for tackling current and future global challenges. In the meeting, both India and EU acknowledged the difficult circumstances caused globally by the pandemic. The leaders deeply condoled the loss of lives and expressed the deepest sympathy with the families of the victims of the pandemic in India, Europe and the rest of the world. The leaders also agreed that defeating the COVID-19 pandemic through global cooperation and solidarity should remain the foremost priority while stressing on the commitment to work together to ensure a better, safer, sustainable and inclusive recovery. India and EU supported universal, safe, equitable and affordable access to COVID-19 vaccines, diagnostics and treatments and the strengthening of health systems and acknowledged the key role of the Access to COVID-19 Tools Accelerator (ACT-A) in this regard. The EU members welcomed India's efforts to produce and distribute COVID-19 vaccines to over 90 countries through its vaccine Maitri. India appreciated the EU's and its member states' quick support and assistance coordinated through the EU's civil protection mechanism, keeping the spirit of solidarity and cooperation that has been the hallmark of India-EU relations. In a major breakthrough against the coronavirus infection, a drug developed by the Defense Research and Development Organization (DRDO) got approval for emergency use by the Drugs Controller General of India (DCGI). Amid the second wave of COVID-19 pandemic, this drug will prove to be beneficial for the patients who are suffering from COVID-19. The drug 2-deoxy-D-glucose comes in powder form in sachet, which needs to be taken orally by dissolving it in water. It accumulates in the virus-infected cells and prevents virus growth by stopping viral synthesis and energy production. Its selective accumulation in virally infected cells makes this drug unique. The drug has been developed by one of the DRDO lab, Institute of Nuclear Medicine and Allied Sciences, INMAS, in collaboration with Dr. Reddy's laboratories. Results of clinical trials have shown that this molecule helps in faster recovery of hospitalized patients and reduces supplemental oxygen dependence. DCGI granted permission for emergency use of this drug as adjunct therapy in moderate to severe COVID patients. Being a generic molecule and analog of glucose, it can be easily produced and made available in the country. Based on successful results, DCGI further permitted the Phase 3 clinical trials in November last year. The Phase 3 clinical trial was conducted on 220 patients between December 2020 to March 2021 at 27 COVID hospitals across the country. The detailed data of Phase 3 clinical trials was submitted to DCGI.
The Health Ministry has revised the national policy for admission of COVID patients to various categories of COVID facilities. This patient-centric measure aims to ensure prompt, effective and comprehensive treatment of patients suffering from COVID-19. As per the same directive to all states and UTs, requirement of a positive test for COVID-19 virus is not mandatory for admission to a COVID health facility. No patient will be refused services on any count. This includes medications such as oxygen or essential drugs, even if the patient belongs to a different city. No patient shall be refused admission on the ground that they are not able to produce a valid identity card that does not belong to the city where the hospital is located. Admissions to hospital must be based on need. It should be ensured that beds are not occupied by persons who do not need hospitalization. Further, the discharge should be strictly in accordance with the revised discharge policy. The Health Ministry had earlier enunciated a policy of setting up three-tier health infrastructure for appropriate management of suspect or confirmed COVID-19 cases. The guidance document issued in this regard on Friday envisages setting up of COVID care centres, dedicated COVID health centres and dedicated COVID hospitals. COVID care centre shall offer care for mild cases. Dedicated COVID health centre shall offer care for all cases that have been clinically assigned as moderate, and dedicated COVID hospitals shall offer comprehensive care primarily for those who have been clinically assigned as severe. These hospitals should either be a full hospital or a separate block in a hospital with preferably separate entry and exit. Principal Scientific Advisor to the Government, Professor K. Vijay Raghavan, asserted that the insidious asymptomatic transmission can be stopped if these guidelines are followed properly. He said even though it may sound difficult, it can be done and it may help India avert the third wave of the coronavirus. The Supreme Court on Saturday constituted a 12-member task force to assess availability and distribution of medical oxygen on a scientific, rational and equitable basis across the country. The task force will also suggest measures to ensure availability of medicines needed to treat COVID-19. A bench of Justices D.Y. Chandrachud and M.R. Shah said the rationale for constituting the task force at the national level is to facilitate a public health response to the pandemic based on scientific and specialized domain knowledge. The task force will consist of leading experts from across the country as members and resource persons.
The government has ensured that global aid is being effectively and promptly allocated and delivered to states and union territories to strengthen their efforts to tackle COVID-19. According to the Health Ministry, a total of 2,933 oxygen concentrators, 2,429 oxygen cylinders, 13 oxygen generation plants, 2,951 ventilators and more than 3 lakh remdesivir vials have been delivered so far. The global community has been extending a helping hand in supporting efforts of India to meet the challenges and requirements of the unprecedented surge in the number of COVID-19 cases during the second wave. The Health Ministry said this is a reflection of the solidarity and goodwill towards India. Meanwhile, an IAF aircraft carrying 3 oxygen generators and 360 oxygen concentrators arrived from Israel last night. Each generator has the capacity to meet the oxygen needs of a 120-bed hospital. India said it deeply values this support from Israel and this will boost the country's oxygen capacities. Over 16 crore 73 lakh COVID vaccine doses have been administered to the beneficiaries in the country so far. The Health and Family Welfare Ministry has said that over 22 lakh 97,000 doses have been administered to the beneficiaries within 24 hours in the country. As the Phase 3 of the nationwide vaccination drive is gaining momentum in the country, over 14 lakh 88,000 beneficiaries of the age group 18 to 44 years have received their first dose so far. The country registered over 4 lakh new COVID cases in the last 24 hours.
In today's Hotspot section, we bring you a discussion on Prime Minister Narendra Modi's recent virtual summits with British, Australian premiers and European Council and their significance.
Ambassador Mr. Wadhwa, if we look at Prime Minister Modi's recent virtual summit with Boris Johnson, and the PM referred to the virtual summit as being a very productive one, and it was also announced that a roadmap 2030 has been decided upon for elevating India-UK ties. How much of an emphasis do you give to this summit and also the roadmap 2030, which takes this bilateral relationship forward, especially as we are also looking for the discussions going on to achieve a free trade agreement, the FTA?
I think this was quite a comprehensive summit because although held virtually, and as you know, Boris Johnson has been trying to pay a visit to India. It's not been possible despite scheduling it on 2 occasions in the past. But actually, this summit was very well prepared in my view. I think it was not just a common vision of a new and transformational comprehensive strategic partnership between India and UK, but also the India-UK roadmap to 2030 to steer the cooperation for the next 10 years, which you mentioned. Now, of course, one can look at it from the perspective of what is the focus of the roadmap and this partnership. But you rightly said that the meat of it lies in the trade and investment aspects of this summit. And along with that, the roadmap actually has gone into some very comprehensive areas. Something like 25 odd areas have been gone into for enhanced cooperation between India and the UK. And coupled with the 9 MOUs that were signed during this virtual summit, I think India-UK relationship is set for a quantum leap in the future.
Ambassador Wadhwa, Prime Minister, later he tweeted and he said that we welcomed launch of an enhanced trade partnership as a roadmap to a comprehensive FTA with the target to more than double the bilateral trade by 2030. We also agreed upon several new initiatives in health, technology, energy, etc. And we also saw that both India and the UK, they issued a joint statement after the virtual summit. And the summit also talked about the responses and the aid which the UK has sent to India as India faces the second wave of the COVID health crisis in India. Ambassador Wadhwa, how much do you think has this initiative that the UK has reached out to India and has been among some of the most generous nations in coming to India's aid? How does this tie with the other important bilateral aspects of this relationship?
I think it's very important that this enhanced cooperation between the two, especially in terms of science and technology, and in particular vaccines that they talked about, health cooperation in particular. That's of particular importance given the fact that India is now facing this second wave. Quite unexpected when this summit was being prepared. But at the same time, we've seen the alacrity with which the British government has acted and also sent, as you rightly pointed out, a lot of aid to India. Now, of course, in future, the cooperation between AstraZeneca and the Serum Institute of India is going to be crucial going forward, not just for the Indian vaccination program, but also for the rollout of the global health vaccination program. And their cooperation in particular will be important going forward in terms of the future impact this partnership will have with third countries, especially those who cannot afford the vaccine. So from that perspective, I think there was a comprehensive discussion. It's been followed up, of course, by a visit of the External Affairs Minister to UK, as you know, who's also in the United Kingdom in connection with the G7 Foreign Ministers meeting, preparing for the G7 summit in June 2021. So if you look at it in perspective, I think it's not just the vaccine cooperation, but also overall cooperation that they discussed in terms of science and technology, biotechnology, and also what they can do together to unleash their potential in innovation, which is important.
Ambassador Wadhwa, according to the joint statement that has come out at the end of the India-UK summit, the two countries agreed to expand and enhance the existing vaccine partnership and highlighting the successful collaboration between Oxford University, AstraZeneca and the Serum Institute of India. They emphasized that the international community should learn lessons and agree to work together to reform and strengthen WHO and the global health security architecture to strengthen pandemic resilience. Now here, if we were also to take into account the Prime Minister's call and conversation with the Australian Prime Minister yesterday, where the PM thanked the Australian PM again for the aid that we have received, but he also sought Australia's help at WTO, which India has sought waivers. How do you think the international community is looking at what is going to take place at WTO with India, South Africa, the US saying that it will back the waivers? Do you think that this is something which will be doable in the near future?
I think you touched upon a very important point here because more than 100 countries today support the waiver for intellectual property rights under the TRIPS agreement for production of vaccines at affordable rates all the world over. And the motion has been led by India and South Africa. Now, of course, in the beginning, due to the pharmaceutical companies' lobby, countries like the United States, UK, EU, and Canada were opposed to this proposal. But over the past few days, we've seen how there's been a turnaround in the United States policy on this issue, and there's a statement which has come out very clearly in support of waiving the IPRs as far as vaccines are concerned by the United States. That is definitely going to have an effect on how other countries look at it, especially the developed countries who have developed pharmaceutical industry. And in that regard, the cooperation of UK and the European Union in general becomes important. But yes, Australia is a very important country as well, plays a very important role in the WHO. And that is why that conversation with Prime Minister Modi with Scott Morrison was extremely important because that will ensure equitable and affordable access to the COVID-19 vaccines in the future. And also, there would be enhanced cooperation with regard to vaccine rollout distribution going forward if this comes through. Now, of course, I don't see this happening overnight. It's going to be a process which will have to be taken up by the World Health Assembly, but also the WTO in particular, because that's where we will be debating the IPRs under the TRIPS agreement, and perhaps it will take at least 6 months before the actual agreement can be hammered out, and what are the terms which come out of this agreement also have to be looked at very, very carefully. But it's at least a saving grace that there are increasing number of countries, especially from the developed world, who are now coming around to this idea.
Mr. Vadva, we also saw that in the telephonic conversation, Prime Minister Modi spoke to the Australian Prime Minister and both leaders took note of the progress made in the India-Australia Comprehensive Strategic Partnership. Since the virtual summit, which was last held in June 2020, they discussed ways to further cooperation and foster people-to-people ties. And the statement clearly says that the leaders also discussed regional issues and reiterated the importance of working together for a rules-based international order and a free, open and inclusive Indo-Pacific region. When we see this emphasis which is on the Indo-Pacific region and a rules-based international order, would it be fair to assume that this is again somewhere an indication of where the world stands with relation to China's increasing and seemingly dominant behavior on the global stage?
Yes, I think the cooperation between Australia and India has always stressed this factor of regional issues and the rule-based international order in the Indo-Pacific. In fact, there has been a coming together of the Quad countries precisely, as you mentioned, because of the aggressive nature and policies which have been followed by China in the Indo-Pacific region in particular, and in the South China Sea, the East China Sea, on the borders with India, in the Western Pacific and the Southern Pacific. So if you take that into account, this is a natural reaction, and naturally peace-loving countries who want to preserve the rule of law and sovereignty in the region would obviously come together on these principles. And therefore, this is inevitably now a language which is being used by cooperating countries who stand for the rule of law and democracy. And, language in the Quad communiques, you can see that in the bilateral engagements which are happening between India and Australia, India, United States, India and France, and India and Japan. So increasingly, you will find much more of an emphasis by these countries because they want the Chinese policies should conform to preserving the peace and to act in accordance with the rules-based international order.
Mr. Vadva, we've also seen that when it comes to China, there's been talk about the Chinese vaccine, which is being bought by many countries in the world. And there's also a feeling that the US, with the latest stand that they would support the waiver, is also indulging in what is called now the vaccine diplomacy, because it also wants to balance out this influence of China and to some extent even the Russian influence when it comes to the vaccine diplomacy. Do you think that is one factor why the US has stepped up and said they would back the waiver? And also this ties in with the Quad relationship that the US has with India today.
I think there is definitely a factor in this decision of the United States. Plus, you rightly pointed out that the Quad has also agreed that Quad will lay emphasis on manufacturing of the vaccine in India. That would mean that there would be Japanese and US funding which will be provided for the production of vaccine in India, and then the rollout and the administration, etc., of the vaccine in the Indo-Pacific region would be the responsibility of Australia. So the roles have already been chalked out. Quad is to on that. That means that you must have a resilient supply chain, a manufacturing capability, which the Quad was hoping would be in India. Now, of course, India itself is facing a second wave of the pandemic, but that does not mean that its production capacity is diminished in any manner. In fact, it will have to produce more and will need this support much more going forward. And that support is quite clearly forthcoming because we also have had a very important decision by the US administration waiving off the Defense Act, under which there are important components which go into the manufacture of the Covishield vaccine of the Serum Institute, and also subsequent vaccines which will follow, which will be produced by Serum Institute. So that's a far-reaching decision, and India is well on its way, well placed to ramp up its capacity of manufacturing of vaccines in the future.
Mr. Vadva, we see that in the India-UK summit, the emphasis has been to a great extent on the FTA or the Free Trade Agreement. And what we have received at the end of the summit is that the talks will take place and the pre-FTA discussions are likely to be concluded by the end of the year, and an interim deal is likely to be reached by next year to further the discussions for an FTA. How important do you think is an FTA between India and UK to take the ties to the next level in an economic field? And also, does this become much more important now that we've had Brexit?
It's a very important step that has been taken. India is not a part of RCEP any longer. So for India, it's very important that, an agreement is reached in the trade front with some other partners. And UK actually fits the bill because it's not a part of the EU any longer. But at the same time, the UK has no such encumbrances. It is now on its own. And the enhanced trade partnership that has been agreed upon will look at the scoping of the free trade agreement in the future, as you rightly pointed out, before the end of December 2021. So what this will do is actually focus on some reciprocal tariffs which could be reduced in the areas of importance for both countries. It will also focus on what to do with the services exchange between India and the UK, and it will lay the groundwork for an investment agreement which both sides are looking forward to, given the fact that there is enormous amount of investments now from India into the United Kingdom, and the UK is looking at investing in India under schemes like the Performance Linked Initiative Scheme, the PLI, etc. So UK's presence in India going forward in the future, and the agreements that have been signed for cooperation in defense, joint production, co-production, etc., they will all benefit from this kind of a comprehensive agreement. So you've taken a very important decision, and I think by the end of December, we will have a clear roadmap towards free trade agreement with the UK.
Mr. Vadva, another important issue that usually crops up between India and the UK is the issue of economic offenders, and India pressing the UK for an early extradition of some of the economic offenders that have fled to London. Do you feel, the legal hassles aside, a political intervention or the fact that the two leaders have met, they have discussed this also helps India take forward its case in bringing back the economic offenders?
Yes, I think that was in fact mentioned very clearly by Prime Minister Modi during his interaction with Prime Minister Johnson, when he mentioned that we must take steps to ensure that the economic offenders who have fled into the UK are brought back into India. And we have two such prominent cases at the moment. Both of them are important cases as far as India is concerned, and I'm sure that the UK will try its best to fulfill that requirement in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now let's take a look at the coronavirus updates from around the world. Brazil expects to sign a new deal next week with Pfizer Inc. for 100 million more COVID-19 vaccine doses. Rodrigo Cruz, Executive Secretary at the Brazilian Health Ministry, said that the new deal would double the US drug maker's delivery to the Latin American country this year. He added that the contract has been agreed upon and just needs to be signed. Sri Lanka has approved Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine for emergency use in the country. The island nation is battling a third wave of the virus. Sri Lanka is the first country in South Asia to approve the Pfizer vaccine. It has also approved Russia's Sputnik V and China's Sinopharm vaccines for emergency use. This is All India Radio giving you the world news.
3 steps to stay protected and stay safe from COVID-19. Wear face mask, 2 gaz ki duri to maintain social distancing, maintain hand and face hygiene.
Welcome back to the world news. An explosion near a school in the Afghanistan capital Kabul today killed at least 25 people and injured dozens others. Afghanistan's Interior Minister's spokesman Tariq Arian said at least 52 people, most of them students, were injured in the blast. However, he did not specify the cause or the target of the explosion. Ghulam Dastagir Nazri, spokesman for the Afghan Health Ministry, said that 46 people had been taken to hospitals so far. Remnants of China's largest rocket, Long March 5B, launched last week, are expected to plunge back through the atmosphere late Saturday or in the early hours of Sunday. At 18 tons, it is one of the largest space debris to re-enter the Earth. In a tweet, the U.S. Aerospace Corporation said that the latest prediction for the re-entry location of the Long March 5B rocket body by its Center for Orbital Re-entry and Debris Studies, CORDS, was given near the North Island of New Zealand.
Moving on to sports, in the Madrid Open tennis, Germany's Alexander Zverev and compatriot Tim Puels beats India's Rohan Bopanna and Denis Shapovalov of Canada 6-4, 3-6, 10-5 to enter the double semi-finals. In the men's singles yesterday, Alexander Zverev defeated Rafael Nadal 6-4, 6-4 for his third straight win against the Spaniard. The German will now face third seed Dominic Thiem for a place in the final. In the women's section, number 5 seed Arinka Sabalenka entered the final after beating Anastasia Pavlyuchenkova 6-2, 6-3. The Belarusians will face world number 1 Ashley Barty in the final game. And now let us take a look at the major developments around the world as reported in the foreign press. The Washington Post writes that a major US pipeline system shut down after cyber attack. Wall Street Journal writes that the vaccine patent waivers could take months to benefit poor countries. The Sydney Morning Herald reports that IOC's John Coates says that the Tokyo Olympics are going ahead come July 23rd and there is no plan B. Khalij Times writes that authorities urge an attack to end attacks in Al-Aqsa. And Himalayan Times reports that Kathmandu Valley witnessed a striking number of coronavirus infections with a total of 3,113 new cases on Saturday.
A quick look at the headlines once again. Prime Minister Narendra Modi participates in the meeting of European Council as special invitee. Discusses COVID-19 pandemic, healthcare cooperation and strengthening of Indo-EU partnership. DCGI gives emergency approval of anti-COVID oral drug developed by DRDO. India's Health Ministry revises national policy for admission of COVID patients to various categories. Supreme Court of India sets up 12-member National Task Force to streamline oxygen allocation across the country. Sri Lanka approves Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine for emergency use in the country. And in the Madrid Open tennis, Germany's Alexander Zverev and Tim Puels beat India's Rohan Bopanna and Denis Shapovalov to enter doubles semi-finals. India is celebrating the 151st birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi. Before we end, let us listen to his favorite bhajan Vaishnav Jan by artists from Thailand.
वैष्णव जाने तो तेने गाइए थे पीर
And with that, we end this bulletin. We will be back at the same time tomorrow with the next edition of World News.